Hello everybody and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. Today we're going to be looking at Bitcoin, analyzing just how close we are to this major breakout and what it means for our crypto market as a whole. I know that we are moments away from our first major breakout into price discovery, and over my 10 years in crypto, every single time Bitcoin does this, we end up seeing the altcoin prices explode dramatically. Now that we're getting towards the end of this cycle, I wanted to go through and map out our time frames and then wrapping it up and taking a look at our total market indexes for altcoins, because I'm telling you guys, the charts are showing something very important, and I got nothing but confidence we're all about to make a lot of money very soon. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you find any value in this video, please do me a favor, hit that like, comment, and subscribe button. Without further ado, let's jump right into this amazing video today. Alrighty everybody, here we are to start off today's video, jumping into the price of Bitcoin. The reason I wanted to start out here with Bitcoin is because we are at a very important shifting point inside of our market cycle. We need to know exactly what is taking place with Bitcoin, because when Bitcoin has these big shifting points in its market structure, it always impacts the route that the crypto markets are going to take, not only Bitcoin, but the rest of the altcoins as a whole. Now, one of the most important things I want you guys to remember is always the time frames. I've been very adamant about maintaining why this cycle is no different than any of the prior ones, and why we just need to continue to do our due diligence by holding this cycle, awaiting for what's going to come very soon. Now, right off the bat, guys, the cycle I've often been comparing this one to the most has always been this 2017 cycle over here, and I wanted to go into some more detail around this 2017 cycle and just help you guys to visualize how much longer this cycle took of consolidation to get to the point of a breakout, and then where we ended up at the end of that year, because so far the time frames are actually very much the same when we're looking at both of these cycles. When we're looking at the date of 2017 at the very peak, we peaked in November, basically the very end of November of 2013. And then from the point in which it took us to get all the way back to retesting that all-time high was just under 1,200 days. And to the point of us actually making a new all-time high was about 1,246 days. When we're looking at that in comparison to our current cycle, it was almost the exact same. When we're looking at Bitcoin starting that next major all-time high breakout just a few months ago, we were looking at pretty much the same time frames in here. And keep in mind, guys, that this was not only our longest bear market at over a year long at 413 days, but we also spent about 180 days just inside of this accumulation bottom. It's actually 280 days exactly that we were inside of this accumulation. And then it was a whole nother 2 years that we spent just slowly uptrending higher highs and higher lows. But every consolidation that we made in here, you know, this is a 280-day consolidation. When we broke out of this range right here, flipped it, and then we started consolidating here. This was another lengthy consolidation that we spent in. This was another 200 days here. So when we're comparing both of these cycles, I think it's important to understand that 2017 was the most comparable example as far as what it took for accumulation. When we break out, make a higher high, and all of that time that we just kind of sit there accumulating before we were able to get that next major breakout. This is the way that this cycle kind of created its accumulation, and we would basically just make these little steps up, and then we'd consolidate sideways, and then every time we did it, it would happen at a little bit of a quicker pace. This one was 280 days, this one was 200 days, this one was 175 days, and if you guys notice that every single time we make an impulse, it just gets a little bit steeper, and then the dip actually takes a little bit less every single time that we go around, up until the point of us finally making that first new all-time high breakout, which is what we saw over in here leading into about June of 2017, around the same time frames that we're at right now. Now keep in mind, guys, that it's June. Bitcoin in our position today is, you know, pretty much still below these all-time highs. We're looking at Bitcoin today just being right here at the very last second towards flipping this prior all-time high as new support and entering price discovery. So in 2017, you know, we had already started to see that first big breakout going into June. We haven't quite seen that in this current cycle, but nonetheless, it's still all relatively the same type of consolidation. This was the longest consolidation that we'd ever experienced up until the point of the breakout. But here's the thing I want you guys to be aware of. This whole consolidation took all of this time, but the second that the market started breaking out, you know, Bitcoin pretty much from, you know, basically July of 2017 to the top, it went from, you know, $1,800 all the way up to $20,000 in 154 days. So we're looking at all of these consolidations. This one was 200 days. This one was almost 200 days. You know, we're looking even over in this one was a lot shorter as we're starting to get into the bulk of our uptrend. But even this one over here, you know, was still about a month in duration. So when we're looking at how quickly these things start to get, you know, parabolic and how much faster they accumulate, this is what we're going to be looking to expect inside of our current cycle. You go through these longer accumulations, and then as the market gets more and more parabolic, those accumulations begin to shrink in size, indicated right here. This one was only 35 days. Going from 100, 200 days to 35 days is a big difference. Then we come over here and look at this one. This one was probably another month in duration, about 28 days right in here, and then that led us into the final blow off top. And all of this was just encompassed over a 154-day period. So some of these consolidations at the very low end of this cycle, as we were just beginning, they were longer than the entirety that it took Bitcoin to go from $1,800 to $20,000. And keep in mind that these consolidations, we're seeing Bitcoin go from $300 to like $500. So a $200 increment created a 200-day consolidation versus, you know, going from $1,800 all the way to $20,000. That was done in even shorter amount of time at only 154 days. So it just goes to show when the market starts to go parabolic, you can see some pretty crazy expanses in price, and they happen very, very quick. We come over here and look at our current cycle. In my opinion, this has always been the cycle that lines the most up with what we're seeing today, where we had this all-time high, and we rallied all the way into the prior all-time high 861 days in. I remember everybody, including myself, was talking about how maybe we're looking at a shortened cycle. Maybe this is going to be a left-translated cycle where we actually end up topping much quicker. And then as soon as we hit that, you know, resistance at this all-time high, we literally just went sideways throughout the last 6 months or so. So as we finished that consolidation, we were sitting at about 1,100 days. We had broken out, made a new all-time high, and then at the very bottom of that correction was 1,253 days. This was us actually retesting that prior all-time high as new support. So something that we didn't even do in the 2017 cycle was actually break out and retest this prior all-time high. In fact, in 2017, 1,250 days in, we were technically still below those prior all-time highs. So if we're looking over here, 1,250 days is pretty much going to be putting us right over in the period where we started to rebound and go into our first major breakout into price discovery. So when we're looking at this cycle, our time frames are almost identical to 2017. There really isn't much of a difference. 1,245 days in was when we first started to go into price discovery. And when we come over and look at where we're at today inside of our current cycle, you know, 1,253 days in was the exact bottom for this retest of the prior all-time highs. And obviously we're a little bit past that. You know, we're sitting at 1,323 days in, but we're now already making another new all-time high. We're currently retesting back above the range highs at 104, 105,000. This is obviously acting as new support, and we're going to get continuation into another big breakout. This next breakout, in my opinion, is true price discovery, because even though this is technically price discovery, meaning that we've made a new all-time high past the prior one, we only ended up making a small breakout and then retesting that prior all-time high as new support. So realistically, this consolidation here leading into our next breakout is our true breakout into price discovery. This was just a retest, building a little bit more momentum and steam before we get that next big push. Now that we're sitting back at the range highs, I've got nothing but confidence that Bitcoin is about to just absolutely rip. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see Bitcoin up here at $175,000 to $200,000 just inside of this next big run. You know, that's not that high up here when we're looking at as far as where Bitcoin has came this cycle. And don't be the least bit surprised if Bitcoin ends up rallying even higher than that, guys. I wouldn't be surprised, because when we're looking at how cycles develop at the ending point before the blow off top, all of the slow uptrend process, that's what starts over the course of the 3-year uptrend period. Once you flip those prior all-time highs as new support and you go into price discovery, that's where you start to see the true liftoff of the bull market. And I remind you guys, think about how long it took for Bitcoin in 2017 when the market cap was significantly smaller than what we see it today in the whole crypto market, and it still took basically the same amount of time to get to this point. And when we started to break out, think about how quickly this market really started to impulse. And so if we're looking at something similar where we do another one of these big blow-off tops going into price discovery, keep in mind that even in the last cycle, as small as that was in comparison to some of the other ones, we still had a pretty big breakout into price discovery. This is a pretty big move. In fact, if we're looking at Fibonacci retracements, you know, we can pretty much come right here, from the high to the low of the cycle, we came up here and tagged the 3618 and almost tagged the 4618. So when we're looking at this, where does that stack up in this current cycle, assuming that these are just the low end targets? Well, the 3618 is taking us to about $208,000, and the 4618 is taking us to $237,000. So at the very low end, even if we only have a small cycle like what we saw in the last bull market, keep in mind that that's still a $250,000 Bitcoin approximately, about 210 to 250, give or take, $10,000. That's where we're going to be looking at Bitcoin taking profits at the end of this cycle. So that's just assuming that we just make one nice big lift off, and it's not really as big as prior cycles that we've seen. It's nothing close to 2017. 2017 dwarfed all of our fib targets. And if we go in here, there's not really even a point to look at the fib because it just absolutely smashed them. But if we compare the same fractal and analysis with the Fibonacci, we're looking at 2017. Keep in mind that the 5618 right here and Bitcoin pretty much doubled both of these fibs. You're pretty much looking at like the 10 or 15 618 probably inside of the very top of this move. So that's the point I'm trying to make to you guys. We don't know exactly how parabolic this cycle is going to get, but so far the only cycle that we have to really compare with where we can say, hey, this cycle today looks the most like, this cycle back in the past. In my eyes, it's always going to revolve around 2017. 2017 has the most ideal structure in comparison to what we're seeing today. 2017 had the same level of adoption and infrastructure growth between ICOs, Ethereum, ERC20s, and all of that stuff. It was in that 2016 cycle, basically right in here, 15 and 16, that ETH came onto the scene. And it was because of ETH that we ended up seeing such a massive outperformance throughout the entire crypto markets. It wasn't just Bitcoin doing this. ETH was outperforming Bitcoin, and through ETH we had ERC20s and altcoins. In 2017, this was the most applicable to the current conditions that we see today. The difference is we have way more infrastructure than ever before, but now we have the true institutional adoption that is here. The institutions have been buying Bitcoin. They've been accumulating it. They've been accumulating altcoins. The president's been launching meme coins. All these SEC probes into these different companies have been basically abolished. Nobody's pursuing those anymore. And so all of the floodgates have pretty much just been opened. Bitcoin is sitting here literally retesting the prior all-time high of the last cycle as new support, and we're currently sitting on top of that high as new support, awaiting our first true breakout into price discovery. If this thing ends up following what Bitcoin did in 2017, like I said, it doubled the 5618, so you'd be looking at probably like $600,000, $500,000 plus per Bitcoin. Is that likely? I would say no, but also I don't think that anybody thought it was likely all the way back in 2017 either. So anything is possible. With the true institutional adoption on the scale that we're seeing today, I'm honestly not going to overlook anything. In fact, the thing that I'm most excited for is just simply holding. Our entire positions and portfolios have been accumulated for this exact moment of time. Anybody that's selling right now before we've truly gone into price discovery, in my opinion, is going to be making a grand mistake, because the amount of profit that's going to be experienced up in here at the low end, Bitcoin's going to $200,000 to $250,000. On the high end, I would say Bitcoin's probably going upwards of $300,000 to $400,000. I think that this is all realistically possible, and we have never had these type of market conditions paired with retail investors and institutions, and I'm really excited to see what that actually turns into. The main thing that we need to be watching for here to see true alt season is when the Bitcoin dominance is going to be topping here, and I've been updating you guys with this chart extensively, and we're still watching the same things, and I see two scenarios that I want to talk about right now. Now, scenario is the first bearish scenario, I guess you could say, where what happens if Bitcoin dominance ends up making one more final run in here, because sometimes with Bitcoin, when it goes into price discovery, you're going to see a little bit of an outperformance as Bitcoin really starts to run. That's what happened over in here when we started to notice Bitcoin at 10K running all the way up to about 65K. It was in this first move, basically Bitcoin went from 10K all the way up here to 42,000. And in this whole move, altcoins hadn't really moved. And Bitcoin dominance was going up throughout that entire period. In fact, during that period was right here for Bitcoin dominance. Bitcoin dominance had been trending down, And everybody, including myself, was expecting that, right here, as Bitcoin's about to go into price discovery, that altcoins would outperform. But the opposite happened, where we ended up seeing Bitcoin dominance rally as Bitcoin first broke out into new all-time highs. And then it was after Bitcoin topped at 42K that we ended up seeing the Bitcoin dominance top and then fall all the way down to here. So when we're watching today, I wouldn't be surprised what if Bitcoin dominance decides to go for one final leg up and tags the same resistance at 72 before it finally starts to reject. This would be the bearish scenario for Bitcoin dominance, and if this scenario is to play out, I do find it very likely that what we would see in the short term for Bitcoin is a little bit of an outperformance as Bitcoin rallies upwards of about 175K. I do think that in that first breakout, Bitcoin dominance would rally, and that would be the only scenario in which I see Bitcoin dominance actually continuing to go up from here. Because the big thing I've been watching for, and keep in mind we still have basically the whole week to go before this candle closes, the thing that we're still watching for is this bearish divergence. We've had bearish divergence ever since we pretty much started breaking out and making a higher high. And every single time we get an impulse and we hit this resistance, we end up making a lower high on our RSI. And we've done this 3 different times. The question is, are we going to be doing it again once more right in here? Is this kind of looking like our first lower high before it just kind of falls like that? Or is this just going to kind of lead into a further breakout, taking us all the way up to 72? Those are the scenarios that I see. And to be quite honest, I don't know which one is going to play out. And it doesn't matter to me because I think both scenarios lead to the same conclusion. We either have one more peak to go in the Bitcoin dominance before the drop, or the drop happens now. Either way, both of these scenarios pinpoint to us going down into a drop. And I think at the very minimum, we're going to revisit this support from the prior bear market. Remember when the Bitcoin dominance bottomed here at 2021, and then it ended up reversing here at the end of 2022? This support level also lines up with the 2018 support level. And I do think that once we end up topping up here in the Bitcoin dominance, we're going to revisit this. And revisiting this level will determine whether we make a lower low, a new all-time low, or whether this entire altcoin cycle is just going to be us kind of coming back down to the same support in a similar way that our last cycle was. I've always believed that we'd most likely go to a new all-time low, but we're just going to have to watch and see. Big picture, I'm very bullish on crypto. I do believe Bitcoin's about to send it into an absolutely massive breakout. When this happens, 2 scenarios play out. Either Bitcoin outperforms and the dominance goes up in the short term, or maybe we'll actually end up seeing altcoins finally start to run on this next breakout. I don't know, but all we're going to watch and see is really revolving around the Bitcoin dominance and what Bitcoin does on this next leg up. But I'm telling you guys, as somebody who's been in crypto for 10 years, I've never been more confident on a cycle than I am with this one. We've never had the same backing with institutions like we have now. And with all of the other crypto cycles I've been through that had all of this fear, uncertainty, and doubt leading into this big bull run that we've always seen, this cycle has more bullish news, more bullish adoption than any of the prior ones combined. So for all those reasons, I'm sticking to my bets. I still firmly believe that we're about to have a big breakout, and you guys definitely need to hold on to your bags just a little longer, because if you do, you're going to make a financial fortune very soon. With that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. If you find any value in this video, please do me a favor, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you guys want to see anything I'm investing in my portfolio, links are in the description to go ahead and sign up on my website. With that being said, I will catch you guys in the next one. As always, peace out.